So this loaf taps you on the shoulder and says, "Oi, this is how I'm supposed to taste." It's got bags of flavour and a cracking texture. It's a polite little loaf. There's no fat, there's no sugar to get in the way of those amazing flavours that we're building through a long fermentation. It's really nice to keep this one pure and simple. Once again, I'm going to be using a pre-ferment for this bread, and as you probably know, I do this the night before baking and leave it out at room temperature to ferment. Now to the bowl I'm adding 180 grams of room temperature water, and I'm going to use 1 gram of fresh yeast to get this pre-ferment going. And I like to rub that yeast between my thumb and my forefinger and dissolve it into the water. If you want to use active dry yeast, then use half the amount. In goes 90 grams of whole wheat flour and 90 grams of strong bread flour. Now you could use 100% white bread flour, but I like adding the whole wheat flour to the pre-ferment. It brings bags of flavour to that final dough. Give everything a good mix with a spoon and cover. Now you don't need to get the mixture completely smooth, it's going to sort itself out during the overnight fermentation. Now my kitchen temperature is 18 degrees Celsius, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is going to sit quite happily, slowly bubbling away until the morning. Here we are 12 hours later and our pre-ferment is smelling fruity, a little beery and slightly acidic. Now the inclusion of that whole wheat flour gives a bit more depth and a really warm kind of earthy smell. Now if you've been watching my recent videos, then you'll know how much gluten a pre-ferment can develop if you use 100% strong white flour. But you can see here that the whole wheat flour has stopped such a strong gluten development, but that's going to work really well for our farmhouse loaf. And I'm going to use another 3 grams of fresh yeast in the main dough, so only 4 grams in the total recipe. This farmhouse bread is going to be light on commercial yeast flavours, but it's going to have a real depth of flavour from the pre-ferment and the longer proofing times. Now I'm adding 200 grams of water straight into the pre-ferment. Now if you're going to be adding your ingredients to your pre-ferment, as I am, do it carefully so you don't overshoot with your ingredients. Again, I'll dissolve the yeast between my thumb and my forefinger into the water. Now you can use active dried yeast, that is not a problem. You'd have to halve the quantity, but all of the details will be listed in the recipe, which I will link to in the description. In goes 10 grams of sea salt, followed by a quick mix, and next I'm going to weigh in 360 grams of strong white bread flour. We're going to bring everything together with a spoon. Now I'm going to be using the bowl all the way through the process, so I like to make sure I clean down the edges with a spoon as I go. And once everything is well incorporated, I wet my hand, dive in and continue to bring that mixture together into a rough dough. Now by now you should know the drill. We're going to cover this, leave it out at room temperature for 20 minutes. Now I'm going to give the dough a knead for 10 minutes, and I'm actually trying to work on my kneading technique a little by using smaller movements and not tearing the dough. Now I could use a slap and fold technique, but I find unless the dough is a little more hydrated, it's actually trickier than kneading on my bench. So I'm about 10 minutes into the kneading now, and as there's a little whole wheat flour in this dough, it's not going to become quite as smooth as a dough would that had 100% white bread flour, and it's not going to develop quite as much strength either. Now I know this dough is ready, but I've been kneading it for the last 10 minutes, so it doesn't look completely smooth. So we'll just give it a quick 10-minute rest covered on the bench, and then we'll see how it looks. And you can immediately see and feel the difference. Nice and soft, a real pleasure to handle. We'll get this ready for proofing now, and I actually got told off in the comments the other day for not using the term bulk fermentation. But the word proving has been around and connected with yeasted breads for a long time, and I'm guessing more beginners understand that term. So time to shape the dough up into a ball, tensioning that surface slightly. Then we're going to place it back into the bowl, cover it, and we're going to prove it at room temperature. So time to prepare the dough for the tin, and although my tin is non-stick, I always like to give it a wipe over with vegetable oil. And this dough has had a nice, easy and relaxed prove over the last 3 hours, developing bags of flavour. I can't detect any harsh commercial yeasty smells, just a smooth fermented dough, a little beery, a little fruity. Now using a little flour on top of the dough and around the edge of the bowl, we can gently release that dough with our bowl scraper and turn it out onto the bench. I'm going to give it a quick pre-shape by folding the dough over onto itself, rolling it up into a ball. A few twists against the bench will help create a little surface tension, and then I'm going to leave the dough sat uncovered on the bench for 10 minutes. But if your kitchen is a little bit drafty, then you can cover it over with a clean kitchen cloth. After 10 minutes, we can give the dough a light dust with flour, flip it over and push it out into a circle. The aim of the game here isn't to completely degas the dough, it's just to ease it out into that circular shape. Now the sides of the dough can be folded over and then the dough can be pushed out into a triangular shape. And starting at the end that's furthest away from us, we can roll the dough over. And after each roll, I'm pushing the dough down and forward to create tension on the surface and to seal the dough down. And you want to continue with that motion until you get to the end of the dough and then make sure it's nicely sealed. We can lightly dust the dough with flour and carefully place it into the tin. That light dusting of flour helps the dough slip in easily without sticking. We're going to cover this and prove it again at room temperature. Now you don't need an oven setup like this to bake this loaf. It will bake on an oven shelf quite happily. But my oven is set up with a baking stone on the lower third shelf, and that shelf slides in and out. I've got a baking tray filled with a chain in the bottom of the oven, and everything has been preheated to 220 degrees Celsius or 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Now being able to slide that shelf forward is going to let me throw some ice cubes into the baking tray to create steam, and I'll show you that in a shake. Now my dough has been proving at room temperature for 2 hours. This is completely optional, but I'm going to dust the top of the loaf lightly with some flour and then pop it on the baking stone with the shelf pulled forward. I'm going to add 4 ice cubes to the tray carefully. Get everything closed up, and we're going to bake this for 40 minutes at 220 degrees Celsius or 430 degrees Fahrenheit. This has developed bags of flavour during the initial pre-fermentation and the slower proves. It's got a well-developed texture, it's springy, and it will stand up to being loaded with fillings for sandwiches. But you have to try this for toast. This is hands down one of the best breads I have ever baked for toasting. Give this a go. It is a cheeky little number, and if you want to bake more amazing bread at home, then check out this playlist. A huge thank you for watching. I'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned.